arrived back in Africa but died shortly after that. So occasionally a slave was written up, but that didn't happen very often. As to the earlier stories, well, you know, the West has a long track record of not mentioning that somebody's a Muslim. Ibn Sina becomes Avicenna in the West, etc. You know, so this typically is minimized. Well, there was some heightened tension, I think, for Muslims in America immediately after 9/11. To a great extent, that tension has lessened in the last several years, so that there's not too much hassle anymore. I mean, you can sort of, if I go through, you know, the airport security, typically I go through with no problems. They look at my beard and they think I'm a biker or something. But if I'm traveling with my wife, who wears the hijab and, you know, abaya, you can bet we're going to be singled out for, you know, individual search. But alhamdulillah, that's okay. I think if you look historically, name changes occurred when there was something offensive with the original name. Now, my name, Jerald, means spear thrower. Frederick refers to peace. So there's nothing in my name that would suggest, you know, worship of something other than Allah. So I felt no need to change. I think for a lot of people this information is academic. However, for the second generation of Muslims in America, this information is a lot more than academic. Because the second generation of Muslims in America are undergoing a severe identity crisis. And that identity crisis is, how do I affirm my national cultural identity as an American and at the same time affirm my religious identity as a Muslim? And, you know, these kids are being raised in America. It doesn't matter where their parents are from. The parents can be from Pakistan or Syria or wherever. The kids are being raised in America and they're going to establish an American national cultural identity, regardless of how much their parents hate that. The problem that we face is that many of our immigrant brothers and sisters to America try to tie their home culture so tightly to Islam that when these kids end up rejecting the identity of being a Syrian or a Pakistani or what have you in favor of an American identity, they also end up rejecting Islam because the two have been tied together so tightly. This is why I wrote the book that I wrote in the first place, was because I wanted to give that second generation of Muslims in America, the youth of America, the knowledge that yes, we have been here all along. There's nothing contradictory about being an American and being a Muslim. And we have a heritage. Don't let anyone try to rob you of part of your identity because you're a Muslim. You know, we've got the history behind us to show that it's our heritage as much as it is anyone else's. Okay, the Nation of Islam, you have to understand that the Islam of the African slaves, slavery was not kind and did not promote allowing people to pass on their Islam to their descendants. It was very difficult. I mean, slave work from sun up to sundown, 6 days a week, was fed very little, etc. In most states of the South, it was a capital offense to teach a slave how to read and write. So, you know, even the enslaved Africans who were quite literate and fluent in Arabic, how do you teach your children very much of your Islam? Especially since your children might be sold away from you when they're quite young. So as a result of this, the pure Islam that these African slaves brought to the Americas over succeeding generations, it got diluted. By the early 1900s, the Islam was basically gone with a few isolated exceptions, the pure Islam. However, there were Islamic residuals that remained in the African American community. And two different groups, and probably more than two, but two come to mind, the Moorish Science Temple and the Nation of Islam, built upon those Islamic residuals, but introduced into those Islamic residuals a racial mythology that was designed to increase the morale of African Americans who were being treated as a second-class citizen in America. And they were also combined sometimes with Christian elements, etc. Now, the Nation of Islam began around 1932, somewhere in there, with a person named Fard, and people disagree as to whether he was an Arab or whether he was a Pakistani, etc. So there's a lot of fogginess in knowing much about this individual. But he was a door-to-door peddler, apparently, in the African American community of Detroit, Michigan. And he started talking to the African Americans about Islam and their racial heritage back in Africa, etc. And out of this developed the Nation of Islam. And then Fard quickly left the scene, and the Nation of Islam was turned over to Elijah Muhammad, who claimed to be a prophet. And Fard was seen then as an incarnation of Allah. The Nation of Islam believed, well, for example, in their practices, they didn't fast during Ramadan. They fasted every December, and then Eid was on Christmas. And, so you could see that there were some Islamic residuals. People were told, yes, go out and buy a Quran, but you're not ready to read it yet. Put it up someplace high. Continue using your Bible. Now, this is sort of where things continued, and it built up into a large group in the African American community, maybe as many as 2 million people at its peak. In the early 1970s, Elijah Muhammad died, and his son, Warith Deen Muhammad, became the leader. And Warith Deen Muhammad had the advantages of having learned Arabic as a child, of having studied the Quran intensively, and of having been in contact with Muslims. And so Warith Deen Muhammad then led the Nation of Islam into Orthodox Islam. Probably over 1 million, maybe as many as 2 million African Americans made that journey with him. Years later, however, Louis Farrakhan tried to recreate the old Nation of Islam with some of its mythologies, etc. And that's still a group in America, but it's a relatively small group, probably not more than about 100,000 people at this point. Malcolm X. Malcolm X was one of those many African Americans who used the Nation of Islam as a stepping stone to get to Islam. Muhammad Ali would be another.